And our final panelist is Jessica Squires, who is a member of the steering committee of the Canadian Peace Alliance, one of the organizers of the convention this weekend, and an activist and scholar based in Ottawa, Gatineau. So please welcome Jessica.
Quickly acknowledge my co-author, Benoit Renaud, couldn't be here this weekend. He's at a conference in New York, and it would also have been great if Derek O'Keefe could have been here, but I think someone mentioned earlier that he was unable to attend this weekend, and that was unavoidable. But I just want to also echo the thanks for the book. And I think a couple of us were chatting before the session started about how interesting it is that there used to be, it seemed, not much in terms of books about Canada's role in empire. And now we have quite a good library of anti-imperialist books at our disposal, and that's thanks in large part to many of the folks who have been joining us this weekend. And it's also Derek O'Keefe. I also wanted to mention, in addition to the other books that were mentioned, that Alison McCready has a book out called Yellow Ribbon, The Militarization of Canada's National Identity, which I think is an excellent addition to the library as well. As was mentioned, the theme of the book in which my chapter appears is about the movements and how things played out basically for the peace movements in Canada during the lead up and during the war in Afghanistan. And the focus of my chapter is on Quebec Solidaire. And I think that the Quebec Solidaire is a political party in Quebec that was formed in 2006. And is a party of the left. It's explicitly an anti-neoliberal political party that stands for ecology, feminism, against imperialism. It's a pacifist organization, and also it is in favor of independence. If anybody has any questions about Quebec Solidaire, I'd be happy to answer them, but hopefully that gives you enough context. So as I mentioned, Quebec Solidaire was founded in 2006, and I think it's an interesting case study of how the realms of imperialism and the ideas that were being fed to us through the mainstream media interact with movements and also politics of the big P, political parties, because it was very shortly after the founding of Quebec Solidaire that Quebec Solidaire actually debated taking a position on the war in Afghanistan, which to that point it didn't have. And so I just want to read you what the motion was that was approved in October of 2006. Be it resolved that Quebec Solidaire takes a position for the withdrawal of the Canadian military from Afghanistan. Quebec Solidaire participates in the Pan-Canadian mobilization on 28 October, bringing together a coalition of civil society organizations demanding the withdrawal of Canadian troops from Afghanistan. Quebec Solidaire calls for Canadian and international mobilization, demanding that the UN, which shares the responsibility for the failure of the current intervention, having supported it and whose goals have been betrayed, to lead a new multilateral initiative enabling the people of Afghanistan to overcome the crisis by supporting democratic forces and through massive support for social and economic development. Quebec Solidaire calls on the governments of Quebec and Canada to give special support to women and feminist organizations in Afghanistan in their struggle for full recognition of their rights through legislation, programs, and infrastructure aimed at creating real equality for women. Quebec Solidaire supports Canadian participation in this multilateral initiative, which should be led by civilians and not be controlled by any military apparatus, but which could include a peacekeeping force supervising the disarmament of all parties in the conflict and the maintenance of peace. So as you can see, well, at least I think that's actually a very confused position. It has, it acknowledges that there, or suggests that there might be a role for a peacekeeping force. It suggests that such a peacekeeping force could be controlled by civilians. And it actually suggests that there is a role for a UN-led mission in Afghanistan. On the other hand, it also explicitly calls for mobilization against the war and is in favor of the withdrawal of Canadian troops. And I remember very clearly that debate when it happened and how frustrated we were by both the debate and by the conclusion. But what it enabled us to do was actually mobilize people in Quebec Solidaire and around Quebec Solidaire to push for building the anti-war movement. And it actually didn't take very long, between 2006 and 2007, when the Royal 22nd Regiment, which is the largely French-speaking regiment, was sent to Afghanistan, so that by 2007 and 2008, Quebec Solidaire's position had, to a very large extent, clarified. And I can read you what we adopted for the platform. I think it was in 2007. Which is that we would table a motion opposing any Canadian imperialist intervention in Afghanistan in the National Assembly, support the conversion of military industries and ban publicity and recruitment activities by the armed forces and educational institutions, and express Quebec's pacifist commitment by refusing to participate directly or indirectly in wars of aggression and imperialist occupations, as well as in the rise of neoconservatism and fundamentalism. Emphasize the fact that wars are especially harmful to women and that they lead to inhuman activities, including the drafting of child soldiers. So a significant move towards an anti-imperialist outlook and perspective. And in my view, and the view of my co-author, that's in large part because Quebec Solidaire is rooted in actual mobilizing. And what it shows is how, in practice, you can shift consciousness of people who are involved in struggle and enable a conversation that can help to clarify the politics of what's going on. And I think, between 2006 and 2008, Quebec Solidaire also engaged in support for campaigns in solidarity with people in Gaza, with mobilizations against security certificates, with campaigns to close Guantanamo Bay, in general, in peace and human rights campaigns, not necessarily as a central focus, but on a consistent basis. And because activists in Quebec Solidaire were on a steady basis working with people in the social movements, it was possible to open up that space inside Quebec Solidaire. And actually, when we ended up with a member in the National Assembly, we were able to have an actual voice for anti-imperialism in the National Assembly, which was able to shift just as one MNA in a sea of corporate party types. To be able to bring forth issues that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. The other theme of the chapter is how anti-imperialist analysis and analysis of the phenomenon of Islamophobia have actually reinforced each other. And by pointing to the impact of Islamophobia on people in Canada and in Quebec, it was possible to point internationally to how Islamophobia was underpinning rhetoric in favor of imperialism. And what that enabled us in turn to do is to open up a discussion inside Quebec Solidaire to improve positioning on secularism. And I know that people are probably familiar with the fact that there's a huge debate in Quebec right now about secularism, and I'm not going to get into detail here, but I will say that Quebec Solidaire's position again on secularism, it's better very much better than it probably would have been 10 years ago. It's by far the best of any of the political parties and some of the forces on the ground in Quebec. And because Quebec Solidaire is known to be a defender of human rights and of a voice against oppression, has been involved in mobilizations against the Charter, which in turn have sharpened the discussion inside Quebec Solidaire, so that the position on the Charter of Values that's being promoted by the Parti Québécois has already shifted, I think, in nuanced ways, and it's very complicated, but is improving and is actually opening up the possibility of having a discussion about why some of the concessions that are being made by certain progressive forces in Quebec to racist or anti-religious ideas are able to be challenged now in a way that wouldn't have been possible had Quebec Solidaire and other groups in Quebec not taken a much clearer position on the war in Afghanistan. So what the chapter actually shows is how the discussion that happens is reinforced by being engaged in struggle. And when you come out the other end, it's possible to have clarifying conversations about a whole range of issues: imperialism, human rights, racism, Islamophobia. I want to end by saying that I think that the final thing, which was very crucial to anti-war building in the lead up to the war in Afghanistan, is that we focused on the role of our own state. And in some ways, the existence of Quebec within Canada is already a challenge to Canadian imperialism, especially because it's very difficult to be progressive in Quebec and not be independentist. And so I think that the role of the Quebec peace movement in particular is in part because of that, and those massive mobilizations we saw in the lead up to the war in Iraq and Montreal. That opposition has continued, and we need to keep that thread going. And we also need to remember that Islamophobia is not a thing of the past or something that's in our history. It's still going on now, and it's an essential component of how we can open up conversations and continue to mobilize about the role of our own state in imperialist aggression and interventions in the internal affairs of other countries abroad. So that's basically a summary of the themes of our chapter, and I'd like to thank again for the opportunity for us to present a little bit about the book. Thanks.